My name is Olivia. I'm 34 years old, and I became a widow after a single phone call. 7 a.m. The kitchen still smelled faintly of toasted bread, but inside me was a cold emptiness I couldn't put into words. I was sitting at the breakfast table, trying to tie the shoelaces of my 7-year-old son, Ethan, the kid who could ask 10 questions a minute. I heard myself say, "Don't forget your milk box." But honestly, I was just trying not to cry. It's been over 6 months since Peter, my husband, never came home again. The accident at the construction site on the outskirts of Boston took his life, and a part of my soul with it. Some mornings, I still wake up, reach for the right side of the bed, and for one brief moment, I forget he's gone forever. The first few months after Peter passed felt like a cold, never-ending drizzle. Paperwork, insurance calls, the sympathetic looks from neighbors. I truly don't know how I would have gotten through it without Sarah and Jim, my in-laws. They became the strongest support I had. Every single day, Jim would pick up Ethan from school, while Sarah prepared dinner in the same blue ceramic pot I remembered from when I first started dating Peter. I often dropped by their house after work to get Ethan, and without fail, she'd try to slip an envelope into my hand. "Olivia, take this. Get something for Ethan," she'd say, eyes filled with both worry and warmth. I would gently push it back. "Mrs. Sarah, I can't accept it. Really, we're doing okay." "Sweetheart, we're not doing this out of pity. We're doing it out of love. Peter may be gone, but we're still a family." She was right. After Peter passed, the construction company paid out a life insurance settlement of $250,000. Combined with my salary as a marketing team lead at a small software firm, I was financially stable enough to care for Ethan and keep our life on track. But no matter how many digits showed up in the account, there was always a void, something only real love could ever fill. And that love didn't come from my own parents. My mom and dad live in southern Connecticut. They've always had a special kind of affection for my older sister Amanda, and that never changed. I lost count of how many times I caught those comparison glances, or heard the same old line, "Amanda already has her MBA. When are you going to settle down?" After Peter died, I hoped they'd change, that maybe they'd reach out and embrace me and Ethan with open arms, but things stayed the same, if not worse. Ethan was excited to see his grandparents, but the moment we walked in last week, my mother frowned. "Ethan, don't touch that grandfather clock, it's very valuable." "But, Grandma, why does the hand make that ticking sound? How does it work inside?" Ethan asked, genuinely curious. My mom sighed and turned to me. "You really need to teach him not to ask so many questions. Amanda's kids never act like this." I gave a weak smile, hiding the sting inside. I'd grown up with those comparisons all my life. But now, they were doing it to my son, too. The only thing that gave me any comfort? Ethan, despite being the one compared, remains the most thoughtful, polite, and emotionally intelligent kid I've ever known. I think the most painful part isn't the favoritism, it's how normalized it became. Quiet, constant, unspoken. My parents always claimed they loved both daughters equally, but it took less than 5 minutes in their living room to see who the golden child was. Amanda, 36, 3 kids, married to a tax accountant in New Haven, was always accomplished, perfect, or put together in my mom's words, like she was the embodiment of everything they hoped for. Me, I was always the different one. Last Saturday, I brought over an apple pie I baked myself. Ethan proudly carried a drawing he'd made for my parents, a picture of Grandpa planting flowers in the garden. As soon as we stepped inside, he shouted, "Grandpa, I made this for you!" My dad walked out, looked at the drawing for 1 second, then placed it on a shelf without a word. No praise, no hug. Ethan stood there, confused, then came over and whispered, "Mom, is my drawing bad?" I squeezed his shoulder. "Not at all, sweetheart. Maybe Grandpa's just tired." But I knew better. It wasn't about being tired. It was because his drawing wasn't made by one of the favorite grandkids. During dinner, while I was cutting Ethan's meat, my mom spoke up. You should let the boy start doing things himself, Olivia. Amanda never does everything for her kids like you do. You need to teach him independence, not spoil him. I stayed silent, but inside, I was burning. Amanda was glued to her phone. Her three kids, including her youngest, only 4 years old, were fighting over an iPad, while no one spoke a word to Ethan throughout the meal. Except me. As I cleaned up after dinner, my mom followed me into the kitchen and said in a low voice, Olivia, I know you're trying, but honestly, life would be easier if you just opened up more, stopped being so closed off. I looked at her. What do you mean? I just think, after Peter passed, you should have leaned more on your family. Amanda talks to me all the time. You, on the other hand, always keep your distance, like we're strangers. I gave a soft, tired smile. That's because, Mom, I've gotten used to being the outsider in this family. The room went quiet. My mom looked at me for a long time, then turned away without saying another word. A week later, I got an invitation to dinner from my parents. It's just a simple family meal, nothing stressful, my mom said on the phone. I believed her. A part of me still hoped something could be repaired. And this time, Ethan was invited too. When we arrived, the table was beautifully set. Candles burned in the center, and my mom had made lasagna, my childhood favorite. Amanda and her family were already there. Something about the air felt off. Midway through the meal, my dad gently put down his knife and asked, Olivia, your mother and I just wanted to ask, after Peter passed, did you receive a life insurance payout? I froze. I had never told them the exact amount because I didn't want it to become gossip, but now, with every pair of eyes fixed on me, I felt stripped bare. I replied slowly, yes, around $250,000. The clinking of silverware stopped. My mom set down her wineglass, then said, almost like pitching a business proposal, have you ever thought about sharing some of that with the family? I mean, you're not alone. Family has always been there for you. I nodded. Not in agreement, but to steady myself, I said nothing. But inside, something cracked. They never asked if I was okay. No one ever thanked me for carrying the weight of raising Ethan on my own. It was all about money, and how I was expected to share it like some kind of obligation. That night, while driving home, Ethan had already dozed off in the back seat. I glanced at him through the rearview mirror, my heart heavy with unease. I knew this was only the beginning, and maybe, for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. A week after that tense dinner, my mother called me, sounding unnaturally cheerful. Olivia, this Sunday we're having a family dinner. I'm making your favorite pot roast, and Amanda's bringing that raspberry pie Ethan and your dad both love. Make sure to bring Ethan, okay? I hesitated. After our last conversation, it still felt like salt on an open wound. But part of me didn't want to sever all ties, and Ethan had been excited to see his grandparents. So I agreed. That Sunday evening, the Connecticut sky was blanketed in gray clouds. When I arrived, Amanda and her family were already there. Her three kids were running around the living room, laughter echoing off the walls. Ethan tiptoed inside, slipping off his shoes, proudly holding a toy box. I brought my building blocks for Chloe, he said with excitement. Amanda glanced over, smiling faintly. Oh, that's sweet. But my kids don't really play with those anymore. They're more into iPads now. I sighed quietly and said nothing. We sat down to dinner at exactly 6 p.m. My mother placed the pot roast at the center of the table, candlelight dancing across her face like everything was just perfect. But I could sense the tension, thick in the air. Something was coming. I could feel it. And then, just as I'd expected, my father put down his fork, his voice calm but heavy. Olivia, your mother and I have been thinking about you, about Ethan, about this whole family. I looked up, my heart slowing in my chest. You're doing fairly well, aren't you? My mother added, her smile a little too polished. You have the insurance from Peter, a good job. Only one child to support. Meanwhile, Amanda's struggling with a lot more. Amanda, seated beside me, gave a small nod, like it was an undeniable fact. Then she spoke, her voice coated in calculated sweetness. I know I have no right to ask for anything, Olivia, but I was thinking, if both of us pitched in a bit each month for mom and dad, it would really help. We're family, after all. Supporting each other is what we do. I hadn't even opened my mouth when she continued, still playing the humble card I'd seen her use countless times. I can send $300 a month. I wish it could be more, but with 3 kids and Jake's paycheck. My mother placed a hand on Amanda's shoulder, clearly touched, then turned to me. And you, Olivia? Could you send maybe $800 a month? 800? I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. My father joined in, squinting slightly like he was negotiating a deal. If you could make it 1,000, that'd be even better. Your mom needs to fix the roof before winter, and I really need to get new dentures. I glanced around the table. All eyes were on me, like I was the only fish left in the bowl. Ethan sat quietly, eating his soup, completely unaware of the financial storm swirling around him. I wanted to say no. I wanted to explain that the money was for my son's future, for college, maybe even his first apartment one day. But I knew the truth. If I refused, they'd grow cold again, distant, just like they always had. And so I heard myself say, "All right, I'll send 1,000 a month." The words felt like a noose tightening around my chest. Amanda smiled softly, my mother clapped her hands as if she'd just won a prize, and my father nodded like he'd just closed a major deal. That night, while driving home, I didn't say a word the entire way. Ethan sat in the back, humming a tune from one of his children's shows, completely unaware that his mother had just been cornered into a promise she never wanted to make. But deep down, I knew. No amount of money would ever be enough. Because what they wanted wasn't just the money. I started sending the payments on the 5th of every month, just like I'd promised. $1,000. Not a small amount for a single mother. But I told myself, this is how they'll finally see me differently. This is how Ethan will be loved. This is how I'll stop being the one they always compare. The first month after the transfer, I got a text from my mom. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'm using this to fix the washing machine. It sounds like a tractor every time it spins." The second month, there was nothing. No text, no call, just the account deduction. Fast and cold, like swiping a card for something you didn't even want. I stayed silent until one Thursday afternoon, when I needed someone to pick up Ethan early because I had a last-minute meeting with a major client. I called my mom. "Mom, I really can't make it today. Could you please pick up Ethan? Just this once?" There was a long sigh on the other end. "Oh, Olivia, my back's been acting up, and I have my high school reunion tonight. Can you figure something out?" I forced a smile, though my heart sank. "Okay, Mom, I understand." I hung up, feeling lost. Then I called Sarah, my late husband's mother. I didn't even finish explaining before she jumped in. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Jim's already out at the grocery store. I'll tell him to swing by the school. Ethan loves riding with him anyway. You just focus on work." Every time this happened, I was reminded of something I'd known deep down but hadn't wanted to admit. Real family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by action. Sarah, even after losing her only son, never once let me feel alone. She always treated me like a daughter, and Ethan like her grandson. No paperwork, no conditions. My parents? They kept taking the money, still vacationed with their old friends, still bought a new couch for their living room. But when I asked them to watch Ethan for just one evening, so I could attend an award ceremony at work, after nearly 10 years of dedication, my mom said, "Oh, Olivia, I already promised to go to a play with my girlfriends. Remember Susan, my old friend? She's the lead actress. Can't Amanda help you?" Amanda? The same woman who couldn't stand a child talking for more than 3 minutes? I froze, then said calmly, "It's okay, Mom. I'll figure it out." That night, Sarah wore her deep purple velvet dress and came with me to the award ceremony. Jim stayed home, played Legos with Ethan, and taught him how to fold paper airplanes. When I walked on stage under the spotlight, I thought of Peter and knew he'd be proud. But at the same time, I felt a quiet emptiness. I was sending money every month to people who didn't even care, while the ones who had never asked for anything were giving me everything I truly needed: time, care, and unconditional love. By the fourth month, when my mom texted asking if I could send $300 more to help Amanda with Chloe's school tuition, I said nothing. Not because I couldn't afford it, but I started asking myself, what am I really trying to buy here? A nod? A compliment? Or just the feeling that I'm not invisible in the eyes of my own parents? One evening, while Ethan was working on his math homework, he looked up and asked, "Mom, how come Grandma Sarah always smiles when I visit, but Grandma just shakes her head when I talk?" I froze. I hadn't realized he noticed. "Grandma Sarah is different from Grandma," I said softly. "But I think you're a wonderful kid, Ethan, and you deserve to be loved, not compared." Ethan smiled and went back to his homework. I, on the other hand, turned to the bank statement I had printed earlier that day. A negative $1,000 stood clearly on the first line of the transfer list. I didn't know when I'd stop, but one thing was certain: every boundary has its limit, and mine was getting very close. At the beginning of December, when snow had started blanketing rooftops in the suburbs of Shelton, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was unusually sweet, like honey masking something hard to swallow. "Olivia, this year we're having a more elegant Christmas party, something a bit formal. Just adults, okay?" I hesitated. "You mean, don't bring Ethan?" "Yes, you understand. Your son's a good boy, I know. But this time, I want a peaceful evening. Wine, classical music, adult conversation. Ethan would be bored." I looked over at my son, who was coloring a Christmas train in bright red marker. His eyes sparkled like holiday lights. I couldn't bring myself to tell him that this year he wouldn't see his grandparents under the glowing tree. After a night of thinking, I called Sarah and Jim. "Would it be okay if Ethan stayed with you on Christmas Eve? My parents are hosting an adults-only party." Sarah didn't ask questions. She simply said, "Of course, sweetheart. Jim's already planning to make gingerbread with Ethan. He'll have a great time." And so, on the night of December 24th, I drove alone to my parents' house, carrying a silver-wrapped gift basket. The streets were glowing with lights, but inside me was nothing but a quiet heaviness. But when I opened the door, the scene inside took my breath away. Festive Christmas music filled the living room. Under the towering tree was a crowd of children running and laughing like it was the best night of their lives. Amanda sat on the couch, chatting with relatives, while my parents handed out candy to the kids. I counted quickly, at least 7 children: Amanda's 3, 2 from my aunt, and my cousin's son from New Jersey. Only one was missing: Ethan. I stood frozen in the doorway, the gift bag heavy in my hand, my heart like ice. A voice came from behind me. "Olivia, why didn't you bring Ethan?" It was Linda, my cousin. I forced a smile. "My parents said this was an adults-only party." The room fell still for a moment. Then several people turned to look at me, puzzled. Amanda began to stand, her mouth opening to speak, but I raised my hand. "Sorry, everyone, before we go on enjoying ourselves, I need to say something." The room went silent, like the sound had been sucked out entirely. Only the lights twinkled off the hardwood floor. "I came here alone tonight because my mother called and specifically said this was an adults-own party. No children allowed. I respected that. But now I see that rule didn't apply to anyone else, just to me and my son." I saw my mother press her lips tightly together. My father furrowed his brow, clearly trying to figure out a way to defuse the situation. But I was too exhausted to soften anything. This isn't just favoritism, I continued, my voice shaking but firm. This was a deliberate choice to exclude Ethan, a child who's done nothing wrong other than not being Amanda's son. Amanda chimed in. Olivia, don't make this a big deal. I didn't even know what Mom told you. I turned to her with a cold smile. You didn't know? What about telling Mom and Dad every month that you're sending $500 just so I'd feel the need to contribute double? You didn't know about that either? The room buzzed with whispers, eyes wide. Jake, Amanda's husband, had been silent until now. Suddenly, he sat up straight. You've been sending money to your parents? From which account? Amanda's face turned pale. No, I mean, not really. Mom and Dad said just to convince Olivia. I nodded. So, every month, I've been sending $1,000 to people who didn't even think my son deserved a place in their home. A voice spoke up from the back of the room. Aunt Monica, usually the quietest at gatherings. Oh my God, so this whole past year, you've been scamming Olivia for money while excluding her child from the family? No one answered. I took a deep breath. I don't need an apology. I don't need an explanation. I just want to make something very clear. From this moment on, Ethan and I will no longer be part of fake celebrations like this. I placed the gift bag on the table, turned, and walked to the door. When it shut behind me, for the first time in years, it felt like the closing of a chapter I should have ended long ago. I left the house I grew up in feeling strangely relieved, even as a dull ache throbbed from my chest to my spine. Outside, snow fell thick and fast. The yellow light from nearby homes spilled softly onto the street like faded memories. I had finally cut myself free from a family performance that had gone on for far too long. But behind me, in that house, the storm was only just beginning. The next morning, while I was making breakfast for Ethan and Sarah was busy stirring hot chocolate in the kitchen, my phone rang. It was Aunt Ellen, my father's sister, the one who rarely got involved but always paid attention. Olivia, she said, her voice still trembling, you did the right thing. After you left last night, it was like someone poured cold water over the entire room. I stayed silent, listening. Uncle Larry stood up immediately. He said he couldn't sit through a party where his niece was treated like that. Then Becky and her husband left too. They packed up without even staying for dessert. One by one, people walked out. Some even said aloud, "It's shameful what they did to Olivia." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. And Jake, Amanda's husband, he picked up the kids and took them to the car. Told Amanda he needed time to think about everything, especially the money and the trust. I wasn't surprised. Jake was calm but sharp, the kind of man who didn't take kindly to being pulled into family schemes, especially ones involving money and children. What about my parents? I asked softly. Aunt Ellen sighed. They just stood there. Your mother cried, your father said nothing. But no one stood by them, not a single person. After the call ended, I opened the banking app on my phone. With 3 quick taps, I canceled the recurring $1,000 monthly transfer I had set up back in the spring. My hands didn't tremble, neither did my heart. 3 days later, I received a string of messages from my mom. Olivia, I'm sorry. Things went too far. Can we talk? Your father is devastated. You can't just abandon the family like this. I never meant to hurt Ethan. I read each message and felt nothing but emptiness. Not because apologies have no value, but because these only came after they had been exposed. Then, one late afternoon at the end of the year, as Ethan and I were decorating the living room with old Christmas ornaments from when Peter was still alive, my parents showed up at my front door. They were holding a large, elaborately wrapped gift. I could tell at a glance it was some expensive electronic, the classic guilt gift. I opened the door and stood firmly at the threshold. Ethan was in his room, unaware of the doorbell. Olivia, please, my mom said, her eyes red and puffy. I really regret everything. We're family. I didn't argue. I simply looked into her eyes and asked, Do you regret how you treated me and Ethan? Or do you regret that now the whole family knows and no one's on your side anymore? She didn't respond. My dad held out the gift. We brought this for Ethan. He'll like it. I looked at the package and shook my head. He doesn't need this. He needs love, the one thing you both refused to give him. We were wrong. But Olivia, you can forgive us, right? We're blood. Calmly, but firmly. Family isn't just blood. Family is the place where my son isn't excluded from Christmas, where I don't have to pay to be loved. I gently pushed the door closed, not slamming it, just enough for them to understand every opportunity had been shut. They left, still holding the gift they never got to give. I returned to the living room, where Ethan was building with blocks alongside Jim, laughing out loud. Sarah was brewing tea, asking if I wanted honey, like always. I nodded, smiling a smile I hadn't truly felt in a long time. I hadn't lost my family. I had just finally found what the word really meant. January passed in a peace I hadn't realized I'd been craving. No more calls asking for money. No more messages laced with guilt and expectations wrapped in the term family duty. I canceled all recurring transfers. Instead, every month, I took that same amount, $1,000, and deposited it into a new college savings account for Ethan. I named it Ethan's Future Unlimited. The name sounded simple, but to me, it carried the full weight of a new beginning. One not bound by guilt, not tied to approval, and not subject to emotional bargains. My parents still texted. Sometimes it was a photo of a flower blooming in the garden. Other times, just wanted you to know, we're always here if you need us. I didn't respond. I wasn't angry anymore, but I had closed that part of my heart, not out of cruelty, but because I knew I deserved a life free from emotional negotiation. Amanda, the sister who once treated me like an endless wallet, called me once. Olivia, she said, her voice smaller than usual. I didn't know things would get this bad. Everyone has turned their backs on me. Jake moved back to his parents' place and said he needs space. Do you think you could talk to him for me? I was quiet for a few seconds. Then I replied, gently but firmly. I don't think I can help. This is something you need to face between you and your husband and with yourself. We ended the call there. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty about saying no. Meanwhile, my relationship with my in-laws, Sarah and Jim, had grown stronger than ever. It wasn't about school pickups or last-minute favors anymore. They had become part of our daily life. Every Friday night, we'd go to their house for dinner. Crispy roasted chicken, fresh garden salad, and warm apple pie. Ethan loved helping Sarah in the kitchen. He could now tell the difference between real vanilla and artificial flavoring. Grandpa Jim said if I get really good at science, I can be an engineer like Daddy Peter, Ethan once said while coloring a picture of a robot. I couldn't hold back tears, but they were warm, healing tears. My son was blooming like a seed nourished by true love. At school, his teacher said he was more confident, no longer shy. He joined the science club and gave presentations without hesitation. In every drawing, he included Grandpa Jim, Grandma Sarah, and me. Camping, gardening, or just eating cookies in the kitchen. Not once did he draw anyone from my side of the family. Spring arrived, and with it came a handwritten letter from Aunt Ellen, the one who had called me after Christmas Eve. Dear Olivia, despite everything that happened, I just want you to know something. Family isn't defined by blood, but by those who truly value you and Ethan. If you're up for it, I'd love for you and Ethan to come visit us in Vermont this summer. There's a little science camp here I think Ethan would really enjoy. I smiled reading the last line. Ethan really would love that. I folded the letter carefully and placed it on my desk, then turned to look at my son, who was deeply focused on assembling a wooden construction set, one Jim had given him to celebrate a school achievement. Do you want to go to Vermont this summer? I asked. Will they have robot camp there, Mom? Ethan's eyes lit up. Even better, I said. And in that moment, I knew I was no longer the Olivia who used to quietly endure, who once craved acceptance from people who never truly loved her. I was a mother, independent, strong, and capable of choosing what truly deserved a place in our lives. I didn't just choose silence, I chose peace. And most importantly, I chose my son as the center of my world. Olivia's story is a powerful reminder that love can't be bought, and true care always shows up through action, not conditions. In real life, many people live under the pressure to earn love or acceptance. But like Olivia, when we find the courage to set boundaries and walk away from toxic expectations, we open ourselves up to peace and authentic connection. Family should be the place where we are free to be ourselves. No comparisons, no conditions, no price tag. What do you think of Olivia's decision? Was she too firm or completely right? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt, true-to-life stories about family and resilience.